Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this professional learning opportunity. I am Scott Mathias from NCEA, and I will be facilitating this webinar today. Just a few housekeeping notes as people are joining. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A or chat windows. We will be monitoring the questions and will try to answer them all in the allotted time. Within 24 hours of today's webinar, I will email everyone a link to the recording, as well as an online survey. Once you fill out the survey, a certificate of completion for the webinar will be emailed to you. Today's webinar, The Personalization of Learning, is being led by Stephanie Horgan, Director of Professional Development at Archangel Education and Technology. Before I turn it over to our presenter, let us begin in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. You have given us the skills and ability to create technology. We have used it often to spread the good news of salvation and God's plan for those who believe. Through technology, we have an easily accessible way to communicate with one another. Let us continue to witness not only with our words, but the work we do in your name. May we always embrace our responsibility in this life to serve you and those we come into contact with each day. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Stephanie, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott. I really appreciate being here. Hello to all of you and welcome. It is a beautiful day here outside of Washington, D.C., where I'm located. I am excited to be sharing with you all the personalization of learning. So I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen at this time. And I want to take a moment to talk to you all about what does the personalization of learning mean. The personalization of learning is kind of a more of a movement as of late in education. Teachers and administrators work to develop a learning plan with students that best meets each student's specific needs. It's kind of the opposite of the one size fits all or the one size fits most approach. And it's really a fun and unique way to lead your instruction in your classroom. So I'm going to be talking about a couple of different things today. We're going to be talking about augmented reality. We're going to be talking about virtual reality. We're also going to be talking about Bloom's taxonomy and Gardner's multiple intelligences. I'm going to take you way back to ed school, Ed 101, with those things and how they've grown and changed over the years, even within the last 20 years that I've been in Catholic education. These things have grown and changed since I was in education school. So I'm excited to share with you lots and lots of ideas for lessons, and I invite you to place any of your questions into the chat so that I can make sure that I answer everything for you. So why should we personalize learning? There's a lot of reasons, and I've listed a lot of reasons here, but the bottom line comes to engagement and also retention of information. It has been shown that when students are able to kind of, quote, put their own stamp on learning, they have retained the information for longer and in a more deep way. It goes from that short-term memory to that long-term memory when students are challenged and they're given the chance to interact with various concepts. It also is preparation for the modern working world. We are seeing the working world becoming more and more interpersonal, where students are, or young adults, I should say, are having to interact with colleagues and peers on a regular basis, and they're having to utilize critical thinking and collaboration skills, problem-solving techniques to come up with answers to problems that they're facing in the modern world. So the more that we can personalize their learning and get them ready for what they're going to encounter in the real world, the better they are going to be. So let's be realistic for a moment. I was in the classroom, quote, in the trenches for a very long time, close to 15 years. And I want to be realistic with you. There is absolutely no way that you can make personalization happen with every single thing that you do all of the time while meeting the curriculum, while being a mom figure, a nurse figure, a therapist figure, all the hats that we wear in the classroom, all of the time. And it can't be that, it just can't be realistically possible to individualize all of your learning all of the time. Please make no assumptions that that is what I am encouraging you to do. What I'm encouraging you to do today is to take one idea, one concept, one thing that you like, and introduce it into your classroom to personalize a portion of a unit, or maybe a full unit, or maybe a project or an assignment. You can't possibly individualize everything all at one time. It's just not realistic to think that. So go into today's webinar thinking, how can I challenge myself to personalize the learning of my students a little bit at a time throughout the year? There are some challenges with the resources that we have in Catholic education, and that's just a reality. Oftentimes, we don't have access to the technology or to the training of the teachers. I hope that Archangel can be the answer to those problems. We do offer a lot of financing and leasing options, and we do have a whole professional development department, which I am blessed to be the director of, so we can help with those things. But you also have to have the infrastructure to support the technology all of the time, and that can be a challenge as well. So these are just a couple of challenges, and I always like to go into these things letting you know that I don't have rose-colored glasses. I was there in your position. I have been an administrator. I have been a teacher, and I know what these challenges can be. So go into today looking at what is one thing that I can do? What is one thing that I can take away from this webinar today? And then you also have access to this webinar, so you can go back and watch it for the next time. And we are going to share the actual presentation with you so that you can have access to it when you're ready. You can go back and look at those resources again and use it when you are ready. So let's jump into it. Bloom's taxonomy. We are familiar with it. Now, you can see that the words, if you have been to school prior to 2000 or so, if you were in a school of education prior to that, Bloom's taxonomy had words like apply, understand, remember. In 2001, they came up with a more updated, revised Bloom's taxonomy that included these verbs. And so we have the lower level thinking skills, or the lower order thinking skills, and the higher order thinking skills. Remembering, understanding, and applying, and then where we hope to get our students with analyzing, evaluating, and creating. These are kind of a pyramid because they are a foundational skill. These are things, every single part of this is important. Even the lower order, the lower levels, they are just as important at the top level. So I want to share with you some ideas and some examples of things that you can include when you're thinking about Bloom's taxonomy. With remembering, that is the foundational level of our pyramid. And so students are able to recall this taught information from memory. There are some times when we have to have students just memorize things, and that's okay. Multiplication tables, they have to know them. Spelling rules, they have to know them. They learn them, and then they apply them. And labeling, knowing our country, knowing where states are in the United States of America. That's an example of things that just kind of have to be memorized. You can use tools and tricks for helping to remember, but remembering is a foundational skill. Once we go from remembering, then we go to the next level of understanding, where students are able to construct a meaning from the teacher's instructions. It can be written, it can be graphically, it can be orally. They create an understanding. So we see this when students are encouraged to summarize maybe a short story that they read or a factual paragraph that they got from a science book. Maybe they're reading and the teacher stops and asks them to predict an ending. What do they use those context clues to help form a prediction of what might come? Using Venn diagrams, comparing and contrasting. What do things have in common? Why are they different? Those are all foundational skills of understanding. Before they can move to the next level, they have to have remembering and understanding intact. They have to make sure that they understand and they can memorize certain things. Application, applying new important information to a situation. This is a great example where we have mathematical formulas and they are applied in word problems. That can be very, very challenging for students. They might have great understanding of mathematical formula, but when it comes to applying it within a word problem, that is a next level of challenge for them. Employing the scientific method, also matching where students cause and effect, true and false, where they have to answer why is something true or why is something false, rather than just answering true or false. You can take it up to the next level. With analyzing, students can break the material into those foundational parts and then determine how they relate to one another. Differentiating between various character traits. One of my favorite things to do around the Christmas season is actually read a Christmas carol to my students. And you can do this with the very, very young to 12th grade and even college. But there are lots of interpretations of Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol. And so it was really challenging when I was teaching 5th grade, but we read that book together. Actually, we listened to it, I'm aging myself, but we listened to it on tape many, many years ago, and I would have it, and I really loved it because the person that read it, the narrator of the story, actually used various voices, and that really appealed to my auditory learners. And they used different voices to make the story really engaging. And we were able to compare and contrast how did Scrooge at the start of the book, his character traits at the start of the book, differ from his character traits after the 4 ghosts visited him. And so you had the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future, and then you also had Jacob Marley's ghost. And so we were able to use that to show how he grew throughout the story. Also, ordering of events and explaining. This is great to do with fairy tales. I love the 3 Little Pigs is going to be my example probably throughout most of this, but having the story in like a Google Slides or even a Microsoft PowerPoint on the sides, you can have students insert pictures if they're young, or write an explanation of the various parts of the story, and then they have to give it to a peer who has to rearrange it into the correct order of the story. And so they're analyzing, what does the picture mean, or what do the words mean, and then applying it to putting it into the correct order. So you can see how we're moving up these levels of the taxonomy scale. And so once we get to almost to the top, we're at evaluating. And so evaluating is where students are able to examine the information and then defend their own opinion. this is something that I love doing, even with young children. They can tell me, did a solution that we came up with work? I used to do this with preschoolers that I worked with. We would come up with a solution, and after, you know, if I had a student who was really angry and had those big feelings, I would sit with the student, we would work through it, deep breathing, and we did a strategy called hot chocolate. And this was one of the first strategies that I worked with. And I had the student pretend that they were holding a cup of hot chocolate or hot cocoa, and it was nice and warm. And they had to breathe it in and then blow on it to cool it down. And so we were using that strategy, breathing in and smelling the hot chocolate and then blowing to cool it down, which was regulating their breathing. And then at the end, I would say to the students, how did that feel? Did that work for you? What could we do the next time? And so then we would evaluate how a solution worked. And I wouldn't just say to the student, you need to calm down. I gave them a skill or a strategy for how to calm down. And sometimes that strategy didn't work for them, and I would have to move on to another strategy. And so I had a kind of the tools in my toolbox that I could pull out with my, as I called them, my littlest angels, my 3 and 4-year-olds that I would work with. And I would help them work through their upset or their anger or their frustrations, those big feelings that they have that sometimes are bigger than them. And then we would evaluate, how did that strategy work? So for the next time, they could really try to pull that strategy out, and the teacher could say to them, oh, let's try your hot chocolate breathing if you're feeling frustrated, and try to really fend off any frustrations that they might have before it became big problems. I always liked with my students, my little students, I would call big red problems or little green problems. So the big red problems are problems that we have to stop and address right away. Little green problems are things that most of the time they could work through on their own. Like, for example, if a friend was in a center and I could have 2 friends in my kitchen center, and a 3rd friend wanted to go in, a little green problem would be that that center was already full, and they would have to come out and figure out another center to use until the center was open with only 1 friend or no friends in there, and they could then put themselves in that situation. So these were little green problems, small frustrations, but they could evaluate how they could solve that problem on their own. So even with the youngest of our students, they could do this higher order of thinking. And finally, creating. And I think creating is very self-explanatory, and all of our students are incredibly creative in incredibly different ways. So having them design projects or create learning portfolios or composing a piece of literature or poetry, they have that very top order of thinking applicable to them. So let's talk about, I mentioned very quickly, a learning profile. What is a learning profile? This is something that a fellow teacher and I came up with when we were working together. And I have an example. I actually had my son create one. Number one, it's great for him as a student to be able to examine his own strengths and areas for improvement. But also it was very helpful for his teachers, because I was able to actually send this on to his teachers and say, hey, just want to let you know. So this is an example of Jacob. And this is all about me. So I want to tell you that this was created in Google Slides. You will have access to this. However, a great resource is actually slidesgo.com, and SlidesGo is really cool because they can choose their own background, their own template, how they want it to look. Maybe they're into video games, and they want that. Obviously, my son is very, very into comic books and Marvel, so that's the one that he created. However, they have a lot of free versions that you can download or have students download. So you can even pull examples of these and link them and say, okay, students, you can choose from these particular slides, or you can choose your own or whatever you'd like to do. So this is all about Jacob. And so what I did was I actually had just a direction sheet for him. And I asked him to please go through and answer them and put this information in a presentation however he wanted. He is quite literal in his understanding, so he really just went slide to slide, but it opens up the opportunity for students to be really creative. Maybe they want to insert a video or a YouTube link or something like that. So I just asked him, tell me who you are, and gave him examples. How old are you? What number child are you? What do you like to do? And tell me, you know, some adjectives about yourself. So he chose, he's creative. He loves to play video games. He's my second child. He is 12 years old. So tell me some more. Do you do any extracurricular activities? Do you play any sports? Are you in any clubs? So he does drama class at school. He also has a skateboard, and he is outside 99.9% of the day. As long as he can see his hand in front of him, he is going to be outside. And then I asked him to tell me, how does he learn best? What does he like? He likes when the teacher's really clear, when he doesn't have to kind of guess what he or she would like to do. If he needs a reminder that the teacher reminds him one time and doesn't continue to kind of stand over top of him and remind him what to do. He likes to be around his friends. And he learns best when the teacher and his resource teacher talk together, so that when he goes to resource, he's completing work that the classroom teacher would want him to complete, so that he doesn't have extra work. He loves to move around. I also asked him to tell me, how does he learn the least? What tells him what puts a barrier up between him and the learning, when there's too much to distract me. And I want to tell you something that was really interesting to me was Jacob told me one time after we went to an open house together. It was like a kind of a back to school night. And he said to me, oh, I don't like that classroom. And I said, why? It's beautiful. It's, you know, it was the theme was black and white and red. So and there were, you know, the checkers, and there were, they had some race cars up and some checkered flags, and there were black and white and red all over. It's very beautifully decorated. And he said, when the teacher's standing at the front of the room, I can't focus on what she's saying because I'm looking at everything else around. And that was really interesting feedback for me at the time I was a teacher. And so with that feedback, I went in and I moved all of my pretty decorations to the back of the room so that the students wouldn't get distracted. And I put very minimalistic decorations and bulletin boards up at the front of my classroom, things that were necessary, like the calendar or the testing schedule or things like that, I put up at the front of my room. But it was quite insightful for him, and he was young at the time. And he said, I just don't like when it's too much to look at. I can't look at my teacher. As I said before, he doesn't like anybody standing over him. And he doesn't like if the teacher doesn't give him time to answer. If he doesn't have the answer right away and the teacher moves on to the next student or says things like, who can help Jacob come up with the answer, because he feels like he knows the answer, but he needs time to be able to pull that information out. I asked him what was something that was a good reminder for him during the day, and that was flexible brain, being flexible in his thinking, his favorite subjects, what makes him frustrated, and then also an inspiring quote that was good for him. And so he came up with great power comes great responsibility. And that, of course, is Stanley, who is his absolute favorite. So that is an example of a learning profile, and you can adjust it with your direction sheet to anything that you want to know about your students. What would be great to know about them? I put a link to a learning styles inventory in here, and this learning styles inventory is one that you can use with your students. It's from North Carolina State University, and it gives a questionnaire that students can go through and they can answer. This is probably more for your middle school, upper elementary, middle school, and high school students rather than your lower elementary, but I'm sure there are a lot of great resources out there for a learning style inventory with young students as well. I want to share with you, I actually did this inventory myself, and these were my results. So you can see that I am more of a reflective learner. I like to think about how I did on something, pull the lessons from it, and then apply it for my next one. That's why I love the feedback forms that I get from these kinds of webinars, because they really help me to grow and develop as a coach. I'm sensing, very strong in the sensing. Very strong in the verbal. I lean towards verbal rather than visual. And I also am sequential rather than a global. That means that I like to know what are the details, what are the parts, and then what are we working up to, rather than showing me an ending project and then going back and discussing the details. I work really well with knowing what are those details first. Some students get overwhelmed, so I like to present projects in both ways. And this is just an example of what these results mean. So if you have a dimension score of a 1 to 3, you're very balanced. If it's 5 to 7, you have a preference in that category. And if you have a 9 to 11, you can almost not learn in an environment that does not provide you with that type of learning. So this is really interesting and really great to have. Now I do see in the chat, let's see. Yeah, I've seen that using the learning strengths, definitely. I've also seen, we're going to jump into Gardner's multiple intelligences, and it doesn't necessarily mean that a child is only intelligent in one area. It can absolutely mean that they've got a strength in that area. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. But these are definite strengths. And so let's talk about augmented reality and virtual reality. What is the difference? So virtual reality is when students are kind of immersed into a virtual world. They can think of an Oculus. They put on the headset and they are fully immersed in the virtual world. Augmented reality is where they can overlay virtual elements on top of their real world experiences. I have dealt with both, and so I want to discuss how we can use both of these. So virtual reality, and how can virtual reality open the doors of opportunity to learning to all students? Some of the things that I want to mention are going to be considered best practices for all students. It doesn't necessarily have to be just for your students that have ADHD, or just for your autistic learners, or just for your dyslexic students, or things like that. These are best practices for all students and all learners. And so we all can struggle in social situations. It doesn't necessarily have to be a student that, you know, might be diagnosed with social anxiety. A VR room can actually provide for the practice of various social situations that a student may encounter. You can put on the Oculus and actually immerse a student in a situation where they can sit down at the lunchroom or encounter a birthday party and what they might do or what they might say. And so I have seen this. I've not actually had the privilege of working in a classroom with this type of technology, but I have seen it done. And it's really amazing for students that need to practice those social cues, learning social cues, learning social situations. And again, we can all struggle in a social situation. So this doesn't just necessarily have to be with students who are struggling to read social cues or students who may have anxiety encountering multiple people at one time. This is good practice for all students. Also, virtual reality rooms allow for the application of skills such as like critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration in the simulated environment. It encourages active participation rather than a passive learning style, and really increases the engagement. I want to see this. I want to address that in just a moment. It says multiple intelligences is not a valid concept either. I'm going to address that in just a moment. Let's talk about augmented reality as well. Augmented reality, if you've ever played the game Pokemon Go, that is a great example of augmented reality. Also, a lot of filters in social media can show an augmented reality as well. So how can augmented reality open the doors to all learners as well? Augmented reality can allow for students to achieve those virtual simulations on top of the real world classrooms. If you have a student who may be ultra sensitive to a certain smell, or if you have a student who is highly sensitive to or a strong love of animals, there are augmented reality dissection apps that are available. So students don't actually have to have a real life frog that they're going to dissect. Some students really benefit from that. But some students really would benefit from more of an augmented reality where they aren't overwhelmed with the sense of the smell or the sense of, something that was once a living animal and is now no longer living. And so bringing that augmented reality can really help the students get through that simulation without really being overwhelmed and affected. Augmented reality also shows movement and change over time. So when you're learning something like the growth of the Grand Canyon, how the Grand Canyon changed over time with rivers that ran through it and corrosion and erosion and all the things that broke down and had the Grand Canyon become the way that it was. When you're learning about things like Pangea and how the earth moved apart and broke apart into the various continents, that augmented reality can actually bring up and show the movement and the change over time, so students can actually see that growth and that development, which is really neat. So as we said, Gardner is multiple intelligences. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this has grown and changed over time. So I'm using the idea, but this is not just the basic 3 or 4 initially, the kinesthetic, auditory, verbal and visual spatial. We're going to expand this, and I'm going to show you multiple types of learning, and how the students, they're not blocked into one type of learning. What the research has shown is that students are a combination of multiple types of learning. That's why I really liked that particular inventory from NC State University, because it doesn't show you are a kinesthetic learner or you are a auditory learner. It really showed the growth and the development in the sensing versus the global versus the various types of what's the word I'm looking for? Various types of learning that students may be stronger at, and it's a scale. And that's what the research is showing. It's not one thing or another thing. You can't just be one type of learner. You have strengths and in these various dimensions. And so I want to show you that students that are stronger in these areas, how you can teach to a learning style that they might have and the learning strength they might have. Vice versa, you also can teach these styles to help students that feel that they need this area of growth. I personally very much struggle with a visual spatial. I am no good at puzzles at all. And so tangrams was something that I absolutely could not do in school. However, my sister, who is now a high school math teacher, was great at that and could see a tangram and manipulate the shapes to fit into other pictures. And so I had to work at that, and I had to learn that. So these things that I'm going to show you, these lesson ideas, don't just speak to what are the strengths that a student have, but also what is an area of growth for them. And notice I'm not saying a weakness, because it's not a weakness, it's just an area for growth. So I did put in here, because I specifically mentioned tangrams, I put a link in here to an example of a tangram puzzle. And this was something that that was introduced to me when I was learning how to turn shapes. If you click on a shape, you can notice that you can drag and change the direction in which a shape goes. When I was learning how to do this, the example that was given in the course that I took was actually creating tangrams. And so I had to kind of chuckle at that, because I knew that was not a strength for me. But I did put this link in here. And as I said before, these are all things that you each are going to get access to. And you'll be able to copy these and make them your own, or just use them as inspiration. This is a stop motion animation, and I want to share this with you. My apologies for that. Stop motion animation is something that I did not know about a couple of years ago. And I had a project, we were reading The K, or The Key by Theodore Taylor in my 5th grade classroom. And I gave a list of projects that students could do, and they included things like creating an encyclopedia. So they had to take various concepts and research them and create an encyclopedia, or they could create a podcast, or they could choose, I think there were A through H options. And I had a student that came to me and said, "Can I do stop motion animation?" And I said, I don't know what that is. What is that? So he and I sat together, and he taught me what stop motion animation is. And basically what it is he used his medium of choice was Legos, and he wanted to recreate a scene. And so he put the Legos together and took a picture, and then moved them slightly and took another picture, and moved them slightly and took another picture, and then put all of those pictures together. And so I want to show you what he created. And his name is Matthew. And he created this at his home on his own. And it was close to 800 pictures that he took. So you can see this goes on for actually 4 minutes, and I just showed you 1 minute of it. My rubric for him was something that we had to create together. So Matthew and I had to sit down together to create the rubric, because I didn't know what exactly I was even going to be looking for in the product. However, what worked for him was that was an area of strength for him. It was something that he was really excited about and passionate about, and he was able to apply it to the learning that was going on in the classroom. And so that was a particular scene that he recreated from the book. And so, you know, I think I said, well, what's a normal amount of time? And he said, well, like a minute or two. And I said, great, let's do halfway, let's do 1.5 minutes. And that was his requirement. Well, obviously he went way above and beyond that. And his mom said that he had so much fun with it that she didn't stop him. He just kept working on it. And so long story short, let your students guide you. If they have an idea, work with them and kind of flesh that out and come up with some different ideas. Also using string and shaving cream to practice your spelling words. I've seen this done on a desk, and then I've also seen it done in a large gallon-sized Ziploc bag, where students then had that bag on their desk, and they were able to write in the shaving cream that was in the bag, so it didn't necessarily go all over their desks. Although shaving cream is a good cleaner for a desk. Not a disinfectant, but it is a good cleaner for a desk. This is an example of a digraph that you can break it apart. You can show how letters form together. And so you can use this particular one is Google Drawings, and you can use that to show various spelling rules. You know, the TH, the CH, the SH, you know, those combinations that students would see on a regular basis. Students can include math journals, timelines, and sequencing. This is really fun to do in PowerPoint or Google Slides or any kind of presentation program where the students would have to create a timeline of events for a particular thing in history. Maybe it's a particular battle out of a war. I wouldn't say the entire war, because that's a really big concept, but maybe it's a particular thing where they have to identify the causes leading up to that particular battle, and maybe it was the actual events of the battle. Sequencing, putting things in order, as I said before, you know, with the 3 little pigs, where the students can sequence it and put it in order. Conversely, you have students who are really good at sequencing. They can work backwards, and they can be the ones creating the sequencing for other peers. And so they're working on that area of growth as well. For an auditory learner, benefits from hearing the directions read aloud. I love to, when I show projects, I speak them, I show them, and I have the written directions up so that the students are seeing it, they're hearing it, and they're touching it all at the same time. So they're really looking at the full picture. And I also ask students to use their own words to explain back to me what their understanding of my expectations are, so that then they have to kind of process that information and are able to speak it out loud. Clapping out syllables. This is a classic one. That is how I learned how to break words apart into syllables. You have to be really careful because students they love to clap, and so they can, break that apart. They also can drum it on their desk or stomp it with their feet and learn that as well, but they're hearing it. Chatter picks. If you've not heard of chatter picks, this is, and I just put a little link to the YouTube video here of what chatter picks is, but basically you take a picture and students draw a line across the mouth and then they speak, and the mouth then animates to whatever the student is recording. And so this is a cool opportunity to bring a historical figure to life. You can use stuffed animals as characters in a story. If you're doing Little Red Riding Hood, maybe you have a stuffed animal of a wolf, and you want to retell the story of Little Red Riding Hood from the wolf's point of view. Chatter picks is a great opportunity to do that. You can also animate number stories. This is a great way to help students who are struggling with word problems. And conversely, you can also have students who are strong with word problems work through and create the word problems that other students are going to solve. You can use drawings, Google Drawings, or pixel art, or you can use Paint to create a picture and then bring it to life. This is a good opportunity too if you're having students working with shapes. Maybe they have to create an animal with a shape. You can combine the two. You can create a tangram and then animate that tangram. You can bring to life art that's found in museums. I had students bring to life the Mona Lisa, and that was really funny. They wrote a story about the Mona Lisa, and then they had to tell that story by bringing it to life. Podcasts. I love to listen to podcasts in the classroom. One of my favorite is called Brains On, BRAINS, Brains On, ON. That's a great, really fun one to listen to. Gives a lot of challenges to the students, talks a lot about science. But I also love to have students create podcasts. They can create a story that they tell about. They also have factual reporting that they could do. Maybe it's a real life event. Great opportunity for social studies or science. And you can bring in the factual reporting. So students have to do the research, but then they also have to speak about it. I put this in here, Anchor by Spotify. This is one that I have familiarity with for recording podcasts. It's very straightforward. It's free. It's easy to use. And so Anchor by Spotify is a good one. Kinesthetic learning. They have strengths in hand-eye coordination, motor control. This is an opportunity. I put links in here. This is someone that I attended a webinar for and shared this, and so I can share it with you because it is public domain. These are things on GoNoodle and Kids Bop for brain breaks. And just to think about, brain breaks are not just for young students. They really can be used with big kids as well. My high schooler really loves a good brain break. Now, he doesn't necessarily have Go Noodle pulled up on the board, but they do take brain breaks because they are in a block style scheduling. And so the teachers are very, very strong with helping them to learn about why it's important to kind of take a break partway through their learning, whether it be walking around or standing up and stretching and talking to a friend. Brain breaks are really good. Creating designs and blueprints for various structures, actually building things. Bring in Legos, bring in Lincoln Logs. And those are really fun, especially like during an indoor recess, to see what the students come up with. You can also give them a challenge. Can you build this using only these materials? You can create your own board game. This is a lesson that I wanted to give you. It's about stained glass coffee filters, and it's incorporating that stained glass and why it's important in the Catholic Church, why stained glass is important in the Catholic Church, and then having them create their own stained glass using coffee filters and a scientific method. Alternative seating. People are split on this one. I liked alternative seating. This is a picture of me many years ago in my classroom, and you can see that I had some students have stability balls or yoga balls that they brought in. These were provided by the family. I also had students that were not fans of that, and so you can see right here above my head, I had students that were in regular chairs. I had a fellow teacher who had some desks in her room, had like comfy chairs, there was a couch, and so they used alternative seating. It works for some kids. It does not work for other kids. This particular student was not a fan, did not like, it didn't bother him that other kids were using it. And we did have lessons on how to use them, so they weren't, I didn't have bouncing going on while I was teaching. But he could not do it. He tried it and he could not do it. So I said, let's not, use your own seat. You can also see that I had tables rather than desks. And that was a purposeful choice because I had students that were struggling with executive functioning, and their desks became kind of a haven for them, and they were shoving things into their desks. So I had longer, larger tables so that they could keep their materials right up here in the corner of their desks and still have plenty of space to work with their Chromebook or work with their textbook, notebooks, whatever needed to be. So some students really benefit from that getting up and moving or touching, or it doesn't necessarily have to be your students that are, identified in one way or another. It doesn't have to be students that are just auditory learners, wouldn't benefit from seeing things and touching things and working with Legos and Lincoln Logs. There are a mix. These are simply ways that I am showing you that you can incorporate a lot of different styles into your teaching. Verbal learning. We all have students in our classrooms that are talkers. So having students keeping a daily oral journal on their Chromebook. There's a recording app where they can just record themselves thinking. That's a great resource. They can become a character. We've got a lot of Boggle, Scrabble, word search, crosswords. I know a lot of teachers that use Wordle in their classroom, and they are, this is the link to the New York Times Wordle. They are coming out with educational Wordles because some students or some schools are not allowing Wordle to be used from the New York Times version. So be on the lookout for that because they are coming up with more educational versions of Wordle. This is an example of a word cloud. I put the link in here to the, it's wordart.com, where you can choose your figure and allow students to create a word cloud. And I just did saint, blessed, feast day, celebrate. I did a lot of different words in here that created the dove. And this is really fun for students, especially those that have real strength with vocabulary. It's really fun to see the various words that they can come up with. For logical and mathematical learning, this is, I wish I could spend a day in the brain of somebody that is very logical and mathematical, because it's so inspiring to me to think how they can very logically work through problems. If you've never done a math escape room, Teachers Pay Teachers have a lot of them. I linked you to one of my favorites on here, and she has a lot of escape rooms, and I think I linked linear equations on here, but she's a great resource and is very accessible, very quick to answer with her resources. I also put on here a link to Google Maps, My Maps, where you can use and understand the migration of birds, as well as area and perimeter and scale. And I also put on here a moving project that a fellow teacher of mine used to do with our 5th grade students. And basically, you have an expense account for moving from New Hampshire to North Carolina. It could be wherever. And so they have to use Google My Maps to place that where they're moving from and where they're moving to. And then also they have to include where they're gonna stay in one of these places. What was the cost of the hotel room? What is the mileage? Is it better to do a flat fee or per mile? And what kind of gas mileage are you getting, and how much is the cost of gas? And so again, this is a project. It was really fun to do. And you can see there's a rubric on here. If you want to use this, please take it and use it. I would love to share that resource with each of you, but it's a good way of using Google My Maps. I have students who are musical learners. My son plays the flute, and he is always listening to music, very musical. And so these are a couple of options of things that you could do. It's also fun to incorporate this into a list of various project ideas. So if you have an end goal, you can vary the process and the product while still meeting the goals of the curriculum. And so you can, of course, have them write a song, create various instruments to mimic sounds. And then this is one that I did with my students, where we had I was teaching when Hurricane Katrina hit, and we had a lot of students that moved to the area where I was teaching and relocated because of the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. And so what we did was we listened to jazz musicians, instruments, characteristics. I brought in the Roaring 20s curriculum from our social studies, and then we talked about how can music help people heal after a tragedy. And then I also put a link in here just because I think it's absolutely unbelievable. Big Daddy's Last Dance, which is a jazz funeral. Stunningly beautiful. And so also have a lot of students who love nature, who have the heart of a naturalist. And so there are various ideas of things here that you could do. One of my favorites is designing an oven that would allow you to harness the power of the sun to cook simple food items, and then you can measure the temperature and record them during that process. We made s'mores. I've also seen it done with pizza. And so bake it by the sun. And we used to, our local pizza place would donate the pizza boxes that we would use foil to help create a solar oven. And then also, you know, something like a creation of a disaster preparedness kit. So students have to think through, if they didn't have electricity or gas resources, what are things that they would need? You know, in particular, I did hurricane season. Depending on where you are, it might be flood season, it might be blizzard season, it might be tornado. You can give students a budget to stay within, so they have to do a lot of research. And these are fun things that they can do if it, you know, if that type of learning appeals to them. And then, of course, we have natural, interpersonal, and intrapersonal learning. Some students are group people, and some students are not group people. That's okay. And so I gave you a list. This is a living museum. This is actually a picture of my son, who was in 5th grade at the time. And he did a living museum where he had to dress as the character. He chose Alexander Hamilton, had to read Hamilton. I believe he read Who Was Alexander Hamilton? And this is actually before the play came out. As I said, he's well into high school now. But we would walk by, and he had to share who he was as a character. The teacher was really inspiring, because we had students that year that were not fans of public speaking and did not want to share. And so they were able to share their character in a different way. And they actually pre-recorded their speech and stood with their computers, and the people that were touring the living museum were able to play their presentation. And so it was neat to see how the teacher did intrapersonal versus interpersonal. And so these are some things. This was from a nature walk that my students did. And they did some botanical sketches, and then they also used their Chromebook to take pictures. This is actually of ice in the way that it had frozen, which is really cool. And then I gave you a link to an ELA online notebook, as well as a very basic online notebook that you can take, and I encourage you to make a copy of it, and you can create it and edit it how you would like. Again, this was shared in a presentation that I attended with permission to share to other people. So this is not a copyrighted product. Nothing I'm sharing with you is copyrighted in any way, with the exception of the Teachers Pay Teachers, which is why I didn't give you the resource. I just gave you the link to the TPT page, because we want to respect the hard work that our fellow educators do. And so there are a list of resources here. I want to share with you that there are, going back to the comment earlier, there are so many intelligences, especially in Catholic school. We have students that are deeply connected with Christ, and that is a learning intelligence as well. And so, yes, there are always going to be more and more and more types of learning. These are just a few. And as stated before, Gardner has shown that the original intelligences are not just the only intelligences. There are a whole lot. But what I tried to do is break it down into ways that you could appeal to types of learners. And you'll see that a lot of the project ideas or the lesson ideas that I gave you are cross learning styles. And so, you know, what's good for an auditory learner could also be good for a visual learner, could also be good for a verbal learner. And so there are a lot of ideas here and a lot of presentations and a lot of projects that you can utilize in your classroom. And I would encourage you that this is a link to the presentation. You can scan it and have a copy of it. This is my contact information. Again, My name is Stephanie Horgan. I am the Director of Professional Development. So thank you so much for attending. Are there any other questions? Scott, do you have anything?
Not at the time. If anyone has a question, feel free to drop it in the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And as Stephanie said, she provided a link to her presentation, but I will also send that in the email that I send tomorrow that will include a link to the webinar recording as well, and a link to a survey. If you need a certificate of completion for the webinar, you just fill out the survey and then the certificate will be emailed to you.
I hope that everybody got at least one thing out of here that they can use. And I would definitely encourage you to please contact me if you have any questions or want to try something out and need somebody to kind of run through that with you and kind of flesh out your ideas. Contact me. I'm more than happy to do that.
Right, we just had 2 comments, one in the Q&A, one in the chat, about lots of great ideas. Thank you. So it's definitely a helpful presentation. Well, thanks again, Stephanie, and we're just about out of time now. And I also want to thank everyone who attended the presentation today. And if you want to see the future webinars that NCEA has coming up, feel free to go to ncea.org/webinars. Thanks again and have a blessed day.
Thank you, everyone. God bless.